mukhtalata is to mix with the people. So whether you stay away or you mix with them, which one is better? And there's arguments on either side of the question. Last week we did kind of a general discussion of uzla. Today we're going to talk about its virtues according to the Sheikh. And then next week, inshallah, we will begin to talk about the benefits of mukhtalata, to mix with the people, and the benefits that can be found in that as well. Although, as we had mentioned, I think it was a couple weeks ago now, the Sheikh, Ahmed ibn Qudama, rahimahullah, he tends to favor uzla, staying away from the people, and he argues more forcefully for that particular position. So just to keep that in mind. So amongst the things that he mentions regarding the benefits of uzla that you can find, the first benefit that he mentions is that you experience a freedom for worship. In other words, when you stay away from the people, you're not busy with the matters related to them, of fulfilling their needs or of dealing with their hindrances, etc. And so you have more free time to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so this is the first thing that he mentions, is that you have that free time in order to do that. And this is something, that is very important. And he mentions here a statement where somebody was speaking to one of the righteous from the past, and they were asking him what allows one to devote themselves to the zuhd and the khalwa, the seclusion. And he said that il-uns billah is that this is being alone with Allah is the thing which allows us, and things which is benefited from this, etc. And this uns billah. And so he also mentions different things relating to that, and as I've mentioned before, sometimes the passages require that I resort to the translation to make sure that we don't spend too much time beleaguering the process of translation. So it allows you, this being dedicated to worship, it allows you to devote your time and to be devoted to being fully observant of Allah, and you can dedicate yourself to that, etc. Now, the next one that he mentions here, the second fa'idah, the second benefit, is that it allows you to devote yourself exclusively to remaining away from sins. That it gives you the ability to remain away from sins which you're exposed to through mixing with the people. And so this is the various sins that are committed when accompanying people. And he goes into a list of some of the sins that you are exposed to by mixing with people. And these are sins that you can avoid by being involved in staying away from them. And this is, again, part of the argument that he makes in saying that this is preferable. So the first one that he mentions is ghiba. Ghiba, which is, of course, backbiting, which is one that we know very well, and how dangerous that can be. And so listening to their remarks, and one honor and so forth, etc. And this might even, if we are in the presence of this, and we've spoken about this because we've spoken about ghiba before, being in the presence of ghiba, you yourself can become complicit if you don't say something. If you remain silent, you can be considered to be tacitly approving what is being said by these people, and therefore expose yourself to sin even by your silence. And so mixing with the people and being exposed to their bad manners in this way of making ghiba, etc. Worse still, of course, is if it entices you into agreeing with them or even adding to what it is that they're saying. And inshallah, we don't need the clarification, but just for the sake of preciseness, ghiba, as a reminder, is those things which we say about others in their absence, which they wouldn't like. And we spoke about this before when we were talking about the manners of speech, etc., that it's not a question of truthfulness or falsehood in what we're saying. As a matter of fact, if what we say about them is true, but it's something they wouldn't like, then this itself is ghiba, which is described as a very grave sin. To do worse than that, which is to lie upon a person in their absence, saying something about them that they wouldn't like, this is even further afield from that, which is to say that you've now slandered the person. And this is even graver, even though sometimes we don't think about it that way. And we think, even as the companion said, but what if what I say about this person is true? He said, if what you say about them is true, then this is ghibah. And so anything that somebody would not like to be said about them in their absence, we should refrain from saying it, whether it's true or not. And again, we keep coming back to this principle. We've been talking about suhbah and companionship and things like that, and ukhuwah, brotherhood. And we keep coming back to the same principle, the same statement of the Prophet ﷺ, which is a guiding principle or a guiding light for us when it comes to all of these matters, which is when he said to us that لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه, that you will not truly believe, you will not be complete in faith until you love for your brother what you love for yourself. This is, it seems redundant because we hear it so often, but these things that we hear so often or that seem so almost like platitudes, they're that way for a reason. They're that way because they are principles, they are foundations, they are basic concepts that we need to really grasp onto and really reflect upon, because they are the basis of a lot of wisdom. But sometimes we don't think about them deeply enough to realize the wisdom that's contained within them. This idea of ghibah is anything you wouldn't want somebody to say about you, you don't say it about anybody else. It's as simple as that. These are things that are common for all of us. So ghibah is the first one that he mentions that you could be exposed to when you're mixing with the people. The other one is that amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy anil munkar, which is enjoining the good and forbidding the evil. Which is that if you're exposed to the people, you're exposed to what they're doing and what they're saying and things like that, etc., then you might be held accountable for commanding the good or forbidding the evil from what you see. So people say or do certain things, like the instance of the ghibah that we're talking about. We should be saying something to stop these people. If we can't stop it physically, which is not often going to be the case, if we don't want to wind up in a fight, you can at least say something. If we aren't saying something about it, then we're becoming complicit in it, even though we may feel a distaste for it in our heart, as the hadith alludes to. But even with that distaste in the heart, as the hadith has, وَأَضْعَفُ الْإِيمَانِ, it is the weakest form of faith. You haven't left faith entirely, but you've expressed a very weak level of faith if all you do is keep within yourself that you dislike what you see happening in front of you. So you're exposed to this responsibility of amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy anil munkar, enjoining the good and forbidding the evil. When you mix with the people and everything that they might do from evil and things like that, etc. So, and again, if you keep silent, you're complicit in whatever it is that they're doing. If you see them joking about the religion, if you see them backbiting as the example, or if they happen to go out, they're using their time in things that are in disobedience to Allah, and you say nothing. Maybe you participate, maybe you stay back, you don't participate, but you don't say anything. You don't do anything. You become complicit. You become liable in front of Allah for what is this. And if you die in that condition, you'll have something to answer for. That's very serious. So that's another one of those elements that we have to be mindful of, etc. So that's the second one. And he mentions here the next one, which is riyā, which is that we become obsessed with people seeing what it is that we do. And of course, we've spoken about this before. This is the age of social media and everything. Actually, somebody pointed this out last week. I happened to make a similar comment last week. And they pointed out the irony / hypocrisy of stating how we shouldn't want to display what it is that we're doing, and I'm live streaming as I say this. So I take that with a grain of salt. We shouldn't be promoting or publicizing the things that we do. And just as a clarification, many of the brothers, I think they know here, but the only reason that I do this is because people asked me to do it, because they couldn't attend or they wanted to be able to watch it in its totality later. Maybe they couldn't stay for the whole thing, etc. If it was up to me, I wouldn't do this. I don't like to make myself the object of attention necessarily. I enjoy teaching. I enjoy sharing points of benefit, but it's not about me. It's not about the personality. It's about the information. And if the information could be conveyed without the personality, then that would be better. But the reality is that's not the case. Hence the reason that we had a Prophet ﷺ sent to us. is because we needed a living example in our lives to be able to understand how to implement our deen. And that's not to say that I compare myself to that in terms of being an example, but to say that we need living, breathing examples. We need people and that we can interact with in order to gain the most complete benefit. But the danger when we're interacting with the people is that we become obsessed with them seeing what we do, especially of what we do of good, and making that a point of beautifying it, as some of the scholars speak about when they talk about sincerity, is that when you're praying and you hear someone enter a room or something like that, and you change the way you're praying, you elongate your recitation, you lengthen your standing, you do things like this, and this is riyah. This is making a show of your deeds for someone else other than Allah. When you thought no one was watching, you were doing it one way. But the minute you think someone else is there, that you're concerned about their opinion of you, you change. This is riyah. And this is the thing that we shouldn't do. This is the thing we should stay away from. And we shouldn't become so obsessed that we have to have people. How many followers do you get? How many likes do you get, etc. This shouldn't be a priority for us, etc. This should not be our focus. Our focus should be with Allah. Even we mentioned, I think, in one of these where it talked about how it would be good for us, and one of the Salaf used to say this, is that if you are unknown by the people of earth and known by the people of the heavens. This was what some of the Salaf aspired to, is to be unknown amongst the people of the earth. They're not given any weight, they're not given any consideration, but the people of the heavens, they know them. They mention their name. And we have examples from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ where he relates to some of the companions that Jibreel asked about you, or Allah mentioned you, and the companions broke down in tears, the thought of being mentioned in the heavens, and how wonderful that was to them. This is the likes, if you will, that we want. This is, if we have a Facebook page in Jannah, we want all the likes we can get. But the Facebook page we have here, nobody cares if you have 0 likes. It doesn't matter. It doesn't do anything for you. So this riyad, he translated it as hypocrisy. This is an example of how bad translations can be a problem. Riyah is not hypocrisy, but it is an element of hypocrisy. But riyah is being seen by the people and wanting them to see what it is that we're doing. So this is when we really expose ourselves here to danger, when we become obsessed with the people seeing what we're doing, etc. And he mentions here an example from one of the Salaf. See if I can find. Yeah, here we are. Okay, so it mentions that one of the Salaf, somebody came to him and asked him in the morning. He said, "Kayfa asbaht?" How did you greet the morning? And essentially, how did you reach the morning? How is your day? And so he mentions in response, "Asbahna du'afa'a madhnibin ta'kulu arzaqna wa tantadhir ajalana." So he says here that he's asked, how did you greet the morning? How did you reach the morning? And he says, we've greeted the morning full of weakness and sinful. And we've eaten from our provisions, and we're waiting for our term, meaning our term to end, the term of life that we've been given. So this was the way that he would answer. So, making a case for really being mindful of what the condition is, and not praising yourself necessarily, even in the open, etc. And so the next thing that he mentions here is, so he mentions, and this is an important point, I mentioned this before, this idea of when he's asking, Kayfa asbaht, or Kayfa al-halak, we mentioned this before. The Salaf, when they used to ask this question, they took it very seriously. It wasn't just the way we do it, it's perfunctory. We just say it out of ritual, out of going through the motions. Because how are you? We're not even listening for the answer a lot of times. We're already turned away and walking the other direction when we've asked. But he mentions here, he says, thus if your inquiry about your brother is not motivated by intimacy and affection, then this is dissemblance and hypocrisy. And if you come to your brother, you run into him at the masjid or whatever, you're like, yeah, kif halak, izayk, and you aren't even listening to his answer. You aren't even staying long enough to hear the complete thing. Then why are you doing this? What was the point in this? Was it to just placate him, to make him feel good? You're not having any sincere affection for him. You're just trying to essentially shut him up. If you're going to ask from the bottom of your heart. Be sincere about it. Want to know the answer. And it lays a burden upon us. When we ask, are we ready to respond to the answer? In other words, if they respond with a difficulty that they're facing or a concern that they're preoccupied with, are we ready to stand there and continue the conversation, offer help, provide some consolence, a shoulder to lean on, or even help and assistance that we can provide? Are we ready to do that? If when you ask, you're not ready to respond like this to a person when they respond to you, then ask yourself, what was the reason? What was your reason for saying that? And even if you can't respond right then and there to the need, be firm in your intention to follow up on that. Not that you're looking to get away as quickly as you can, but be sincere about your interactions. Make sure that it's motivated by the right reasons. Otherwise, it begins to resemble a hypocrisy in what we're doing. And so he mentions now the fourth condition that he mentions here, which is that you become imbued with their bad manners. So when you're mixing with the people and they're upon bad manners, they're involved in evil things, you can be imprinted upon your own personality, upon your own character. And we mentioned at the very beginning of this chapter, when we were talking about suhra in the beginning, the hadith that talks about how we should be mindful of the ones we take as friends, as companions. Because you will be upon the deen of the man yukhal, the one that you have a deep affection for. So don't be careless in who you attach yourself to and who you form that bond. And like we had said, it's not saying just your passing friends, your acquaintances, because we have lots of those and we don't always control who becomes an acquaintance. But those people that you make significant in your life, that become important to you, that you have a firm, affectionate bond with, those people, be mindful of who you take like that, because those people will influence you. And if you surround yourselves with people like that who are on bad character, their character will begin to bleed over onto you, and you will start to see the condition change. Sometimes, especially our youth, they believe that won't happen. They don't affect me, they don't this, they don't that. But as you see as time goes by, especially as parents, we see this. You see a year or two later, you see their behavior has changed drastically. They're trying things, they're doing things they were never doing before, that they never even thought about, because they were careless and they didn't heed the advice of their parents. And so they exposed themselves to this harm, and it's taken root in their hearts. And that's a danger, because once they take root, it's very hard to get out. You might be able to shrink the weed, but you might not be able to remove the weed entirely. It's very, very serious. So he mentions many details about how you can fall into these things and renounce worship and things like that, all of these things. And there's a quote that he makes here where he mentions where there's a saying that قول القائل عند ذكر الصالحين تنزل رحمة, that with the remembrance of the righteous, mercy descends. In other words, this is one of the examples that you'll find many times people, they talk about sharing. One of the things they encourage is to share stories from the righteous people of the past, and even in their own families, but especially from the early generations of the Muslims. Share stories of their lives, of the companions, of the Prophet ﷺ, of those who came after them, from the students of the companions, etc. Some of their lives are amazing stories. And they're not all these mountains of virtue that, all they knew was righteousness and knowledge and worship their entire life. Some of them, they have lives of transformation. From going from being, in one case, a highway robber, somebody who would lie in wait for travelers on the road and attack them and beat them and steal their possessions, even sometimes to the point of death. So actually, I remember this story. I was hearing this story recounted one time. This one particular individual, he was like this. He was a highwayman. He was a robber. Would wait on the roads for these people. He wasn't just any highway robber. The people in his village, they knew him by name. And when they would set out for a journey, they would warn people, be cautious of so-and-so, because he was so well known for being out there waiting for people and being so prolific and so ruthless that people warned about him specifically. But he eventually, he was guided and he saw the light and left all of his sinful ways, became, not really became Muslim, but reaffirmed his Islam and became one of the great scholars of the early generations. But he was immersed in sin. Immersed in sin. Those stories lend encouragement, lend hope to especially some of our youth and the converts, and even some of us when we're struggling. We're always going through struggles. Hearing these stories that even the greats, the mountains, they faced difficulties. They were in darkness at times, but they were guided out of that darkness. And so we can also find that guidance, inshallah, just the same way. So these stories of the righteous is very, very important. So he mentions the next one is that you free yourself from temptation and dissension. So it protects your religion. So he mentions here one of the statements of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I'll just read the translation. Seeing the people's promises become confused, seeing that people's promises become confused and their trust diminished, being like this, then he interlocked his fingers, whereupon a man asked, what should I do? So he's referring to here, this is the hadith of Abu Dhawr al-Ghifari. It's talking about during the time, the end of days, when things becoming chaotic and there's lots of fitnas, lots of tests, and lots of trials. Seeing when things get all chaotic and you find many groups all on different paths, all on calling for different things and causing a lot of chaos and a lot of unrest. And so he tells him what he should do. He tells him that you should take control, stay at your home, take control of your tongue, do good and give up evil, stick to the knowledgeable and shun the common people. So stay away from the people. When things become chaotic, then take care of yourself and stay away from the people. And there's other examples where he mentions that to Abu Dhawr al-Ghifari, where he mentions that as well, something similar, where he mentions to him that when it becomes the end of days, he says, then stay away from all of the groups and remain upon virtue until your time comes. Up in the mountains, in one narration he says, until you, and even if you reach the point that you have to bite the trunks of trees. In other words, you're so destitute that your only food is tree bark. Even if it becomes that grave upon you, stay away from it to protect your deen, to protect your religion from being exposed to these people, etc. And so another one that he mentions here is that you should, it saves you from the evil of the people. And this is again, harming through backbiting, suspicion, distrust, dealing with people you meet. And so Umar ibn al-Khattab, he said, solitude frees you from evil friends. So not only you stay away from the people, when you take to khalwa, when you take to uzla, and you're dealing, you're by yourself, you don't have to worry about the evil of the friends that may be around you or the evil of the society you may be in. You're able to protect yourself. And at the end of the day, you have to keep in mind is that why it might seem Extreme. But really, in this society, it should even make more sense because we're surrounded by many things calling to other than the deen, other than the religion itself. And it can become very overwhelming at times. Granted, we live in the real world and we can't necessarily remove ourselves from the world completely, but as many of the scholars of the spiritual traveling remind us, we should all make a point of trying to find a time for us to have this khalwa and this uzla, to remove ourselves from people and seclude ourselves away from everything else and be alone with Allah. The uns billah, as they were referring to earlier, so that you can have that communication. We think of the idea of ittikaf, we only tend to think about it during Ramadan. Ittikaf is not exclusive to Ramadan. We can make ittikaf at any time. There's nothing to say that we can't make, I mean, except for possibly masjid policies, because a lot of the masajid won't let you stay overnight. This is very unfortunate. But that being the case, there's nothing to say you can't make khalwa in your home. There's nothing to say that you can't set aside, as some of us, we have musallas in our houses, or we have some den or a private space or whatever. We set that aside, even if it's only staying up part of the night, and it's just you and your remembrance of Allah, and you're there, and you're allowing yourself to reflect. There's some narrations from the companions that talk about even 1 hour in the middle of the night spent in reflection. In reflection. So not just reading, rote recitation of Quran or something like that, but whatever it is that you're reading, you're thinking about it. You're really reflecting on it. You're really trying to be engaged with it. That 1 hour of that is greater than the whole night spent in salah. The whole night. So the idea is to be engaged. Be there alone with Allah, but be in an active engagement with Allah. Communicating with Him. Receiving the rahmah from Him that you can receive when you're in that close connection with Him, etc. So avoiding those things and saving yourself from all of this. So never approach. There's another one he mentions here from Ibrahim ibn Adham, that you should never approach whatever you do not know. In other words, if you're unsure of something, stay away from it. This is a basic principle from the Prophet ﷺ, which you find in the 40 hadith of al-Nawawi, from the hadith of al-Hasan ibn Ali, radiallahu anhuma, where he says that the Prophet ﷺ had said, Da ma yuribuk illa ma la yuribuk. Leave what makes you doubt for what doesn't make you doubt. So stick to those things that you know. This is true, and this is a principle in law. This idea of leaving what makes you doubt for what doesn't make you doubt, this is a principle in law. It is such a foundational concept that it pervades all of the Islamic legal system. Whenever doubt arises, the guidance we receive more often than not is you should leave that doubt for what doesn't make you doubt. Because our religion is built upon certainty, is built upon conviction. It's not built upon doubt and guesswork. It's built upon certainty. And so you stay away from those things. And then he mentions as well, the avoidance of the people's greed as well as your own. So he mentions satisfying all human beings is untenable. You can't please all the people all the time. As we say in the West, you can't please all the people all the time. You can't please, you might be able to please some of the people some of the time. So it's untenable. So it says, satisfying none, you please. So as for yours, meditating over worldly gaiety enhance your longing, therefore. Well, in this, he mentions a great hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where he mentions here, انظروا إلى من دونكم ولا تنظروا إلى من فوقكم فإن أجدر أن لا تزدروا نعمة الله عليكم. That you should look to those below you and not those above you. It is better for you in order that you don't deny the favors of Allah on you. So, this idea, in the West, they used to have this idea of keeping up with the Joneses. In other words, your neighbors or your friends, the other families, you would see them get a new car, and now you must get a new car because you don't want to be left behind. they make an addition to their house, and now you have to make an addition to your house, because otherwise you're going to look, so poor or so destitute or so minor in comparison. So you're constantly competing in worldly matters with them, etc. So look to those below you, not those above you. And so this is important that we understand that, is that, no matter how little we think we might have, inevitably there's somebody always that has less. Almost anybody we can think of in this society, in this country, no matter how destitute they are, there's plenty of places we can point to around the world where you don't have, what you have. There's people that don't have homes. There's people that don't have clothes. There's people that haven't eaten in weeks. We know the story. How many people that are so much worse off than you are? So look to those below you, not those above you. In other words, so that you don't deny the favors of Allah on you. And so it's very important that you protect yourself from that greed, that you can be exposed to, etc. And he mentions that this is also highlighted in one of the statements of Allah, where Allah is saying, وَلَا تَمُدَّنَّ عَيْنَاكَ إِلَى مَا مَتَعْنَا بِهِ أَزْوَاجٍ مِّنْهُمْ زَهْرَةَ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا. So he says, no, strain your eyes in longing for the things we have given for enjoyment to parties of them, the splendor of the life of this world. This is Surah Taha. And so all of these things. And he mentions this last one here, which is getting rid of unpleasant and foolish people. In other words, if you stay away from the people, there's some people that are just absolute, they bring no benefit to your life, etc. When you stay away from the people, you pull away, you can avoid all of this and protect yourself, etc. So these are just some of the points that he makes about the benefits of being away from the people. But as we mentioned at the beginning, there is differences about which is better, staying away or mixing with the people. And next week, inshallah, we'll talk about some of the benefits that he mentions regarding mixing with the people. And that in some cases, and he mentions at the beginning of this, and I'll end on this note, that mixing with people or staying away from people, it depends on a couple things that are not constants, which is that an individual, what they are like, their personality and everything else, but also their circumstance. You may be in one circumstance where being away from the people is best for you, but your circumstance may change where being with the people is more important, is more beneficial for you. It all depends on our capacities, our abilities, our circumstances, etc. So it's not a one-size-fits-all answer necessarily. It's something that we have to constantly be in an ongoing dynamic relationship with this whole process of how we do it. At the end of the day, we need to keep in mind that our spiritual health is the most precious health that we have. We have physical health, and physical health is important, but our spiritual health is more important. Even if you lose the ability for movement and for speech and everything else, but you maintain a believing heart, you have a beautiful, fulfilling life because of that believing heart, as long as you nurture it. But you can have all the faculties of your body at your disposal, and if your heart is dead, you are, as they say in the West, a dead man walking. You have no life, no real life in your body, no matter how grand your body may appear. So we have to keep in mind the real value, that this is a temporary existence, that inevitably we will leave this existence and we will go to a permanent abode where we will be called upon to answer for what we've done. And if we lose sight of that fact, then we could be truly destroyed. But keeping sight of that fact and nurturing the qualities of our spirit are the most beneficial things that we can do with our time, no matter how short that might be. Wallahu ta'ala alam. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك